can gather at one location.
Do you wish your business makes it to the top list of the most searched for business in the US and around the world? Or are you searching for halal compliant services and products online? Then Halal Finder is your online resource directory pointing you to the right places and products. Let's help you explore halal products and services of your choice as we manage many halal businesses across the world. Promote your business with halalfinder.com, the only plug you need to grow. Our services include business listing, digital marketing, branding strategy, SEO campaigns, crowdfunding, and humanitarian support. On our Compassion Corner, we offer crowdfunding of halal ventures and humanitarian services. In this section, you can make or receive donations, start donation campaign, and check existing donation campaigns. And by paying zakat and sadaqah to our Compassion platform on halalfinder.com, you have supported the poor, widows or widowers, orphans, and the likes around the world. Contact us at info@halalfinder.com or call +1 718 822 5555. Get started today at halalfinder.com.
Good morning, everybody. Sorry for those technical difficulties, but thank you very much for joining us today on the Foreign Policy Review. The regulars are here, CARLO, Ben, and myself. We have special guest Ian KUMMER from Moscow. So we got a lot to discuss this week. I mean, there's so much news going on, as always. Our primary focus of our program today was to discuss all the issues going on in Africa. It's really a battleground that's heating up. With the West has been enjoying all the resources from Africa, just basically exploiting and stealing them for decades, generations. And that sweet deal that the West has is threatened by China, by Russia. So, right now we're seeing, an increase in the amount of coups and overthrows of governments going on. And it's really heating up. It's similar to what was going on in the Cold War. But I don't know, who would like to give their macro analysis, their bird's eye view of the entire geopolitical picture? Does anybody want to jump in and kind of...
Before handing off to Ian, because from Moscow we can get a valuable Moscow perspective, I'd bring in that basically Tuesday's program, we had some events around Niger, which is the latest country basically to oust a pro-West, pro-French government. I mean, sure, it's a coup, but, there's difference between coup and coup. And since then, the northern African countries, which was Libya, also Algeria, very close to France, apparently, they criticized the sanctions that ECOWAS put in there. But Nigeria's, the defense minister, since the 1st of August, 3 days ago, he was in Moscow. And that was news to me that after he talked with Sergei Shoigu, he made this press release saying we want a sovereign foreign policy and we no longer support the sanctions. So again, just like James Cleverly, who after the events, not really with any effect in England, after the events, he put together in a panic a tour of 3 African nations. I'm just going to quickly list them off. The foreign secretary is going to go to Ghana, Nigeria, and Zambia. I don't think it's playing out the way it was supposed to, or the way the West usually likes. So it's not looking good. And I think the war in Ukraine, that the absolute face destruction of the NATO image had a lot to do with this.
Let me jump back in and try and put some numbers and some perspective on what I was trying to say at the beginning. So, about the West just raping and stealing these resources. So with Mali, for instance, so Mali has 860 gold mines, and they've been under a French colonial rule since, for a long time, since at least following World War I, I'm pretty sure. But so 860 gold mines, they have 0 gold reserves, whereas France has, we mentioned it last show, France has a whole bunch of tons of gold reserves.
7th largest in the world, yeah.
7th largest gold reserves in the world and 0 gold mines. So that's all at the expense of Mali. They're just taking their gold. Okay, The other one was nuclear uranium, right? So France gets 1/3 of its energy from uranium from Niger, and 80% of people in Niger lack electricity. They don't have access to electricity, but all of their uranium goes to turn the lights on for 1/3 of France's. So it's just total exploitation. It is massive, total, disgusting exploitation. And that's what is the West is worried that sweet deal is being threatened by the development, by the rise of China, the development China's offering to Africa. So I mean, to me, that's the most important point to get out there. The macro analysis of what is going on. But Ian, sorry for yelling so early in the program. What are your thoughts? So you're in Moscow. You watch events. You have opinions, and you're very thoughtful. So please, anything come to mind with this topic that you'd like to share?
Well, yes, thank you for having me on again. It's always great to talk here. Tonight, before I tuned in here, me and the girlfriend, we went to the local theater and watched the new Johnny Depp movie, Jana Dubari, about the mistress of King Louis the 15th. What's interesting about that is because I think the last time I saw a movie here was back in April. And when, it was a Russian movie and all of the trailers were for Russian movies, there were no Hollywood movies or Western movies or really much of anything outside of Russia then. And now here we are at the beginning of August, and so that's changed. I would say it's actually about 50-50 now, which I think it's a pretty good indicator on top of what's happening in the car industry and consumer electronics, that the sanctions lost their edge. If there's workarounds and as far as licensing and copyrights go, distribution licenses go, a lot of people are just gradually stopped caring. They want to tap in on those 147 million Russian consumers. And standing with Ukraine is just not profitable, because you're talking maybe being generous here, 20-25 million consumers. There's no economy to speak of. There's no benefit. It's just they want to tap into that. So I think also tying that back in with Africa, what you're seeing with Africa and what you're seeing in other regions like Syria is target fixation. So the Biden administration is very focused on Ukraine. And what happens with target fixation, this happens with fighter pilots, you become so fixated on the target you're pursuing and lose situational awareness and can actually collide with it. You crash. And this happens to pilots all the time, especially in wartime. I think that's essentially what's happening here on an institutional level. They have this grip on Ukraine and Crimea and Donbass and are dropping the ball on everything else. It's like juggling, which is basically what any foreign policy is, especially for a large country, for a great power. You're juggling 10 different balls and you become fixated on one, you drop all the others. I think that's what's happening here.
What a great analogy that is. I think you're entirely right. And people see it. People in other countries see that, okay, the Biden administration is just locked on to whatever's going on in Ukraine. Maybe here's their chance. I mean, it didn't come out of nowhere. Just to put it in context, first, there was Mali, there was Guinea, and there was Burkina Faso. All three have ousted the French, including television channels, including export deals of gold. And that is exactly what Niger has done this week. The export of gold and the export of uranium is just banned right now. So why not? And obviously, because the foreign minister, the defense minister of Nigeria is in Russia, they have probably considerable connections, saying, why not? Why not move now when the beast is weak? And end, centuries of this, if not just decades.
They're hyper fixated on this huge other issue. So now is our time to, take advantage of that opportunity. I mean, that makes sense. My concern is, that it's hard for me to be certain that these groups coming to power are really, bona fide of the people and anti-Western. Because it's hard to know if it's like a U.S. proxy that is getting in power against maybe their former EU power. So because I've heard that some of these coups, these guys have long ties with U.S. So I read an article about a general.
Yeah, that's Guinea. Yes.
Yeah. So he was trained at the School of the Americas, and I'm not sure if that's good because they're training America's enemies, or they're training people and then those people turn against them, or if they're training them and they're actually working, still working with them. So it's hard for us to tell from 1,000 miles away. Carlo, what? Yes, sir.
Well, you have to. You're right, Billy Bob. You have to consider the belly of the beast, and that's the United States. It's the beast slouching toward apocalypse in the entire world, especially in that region. And I would add that the general who now is in charge in Niger was trained at the School of Americas, had other training in other domestic camps, and it's been pointed out with several commentators that a successful transition of power to a more nationalist government really doesn't rely on coup situations. It relies on insurgencies, like in Cuba, like in Nicaragua. It doesn't. The coups tend to be ephemeral in comparison to insurgencies, and there are no insurgencies here. I would like to point out the one ironic, almost comic element. As Billy Bob pointed out, I understand that 80 to 90% of Nigerians do not have electricity. Yeah. Yet Nigeria saw fit to cut off the electricity to Niger, even above that. But to get back to the United States, we have to consider here that and I'm an old man, I think it was 1987, that the first draft of the Project for the New American Century playbook came out. And part of the playbook was to weaken Europe, and because it was they felt that the European Union was an economic threat to U.S. hegemony at the time, So what they're doing to France, and maybe if you speculate a little bit, that Macron has been making some statements, and he wanted to get invited to the BRICS conference. He wanted to participate in the BRICS conference. Maybe this is like a little slap down from the United States too. They like to what the United States likes to do is like to find people that are playing dominoes or playing cards around a table, and then come into the room and overturn the table, and to find out where everything is going to fall. You have a lot of uranium at stake here. You have a lot of resources and wealth at stake. And
diamonds, oil, gas. Can I jump in?
That's my 2 cents.
I love the European angle here because apparently I just found this out. There was this massive gas pipeline, which was Plan B after Nord Stream, that went from Nigeria, would have gone in future, through Niger, Algeria, and then to Europe. And, that's come under it's become questionable at this moment. So I wonder if there is that angle of screw Europe even more than it already is.
The U.S. does have a history of blowing up pipelines that are bringing, energy to Europe.
It does have that habit, doesn't it? By now, it should have a postage stamp. The Ukrainians love postage stamps. The US should do that too, commemorating shit. But I just wanted to say, the leaders, of course, we don't know. We're not there. We don't know their background so much. But I can be sure of two political forces in Africa absolutely being not just populist, but for the people. And that's Julius Malema, the EFF in South Africa, and the young president of Burkina Faso. I've seen his fighting words. I've seen his interactions with Putin, and I'm 100% certain on those guys. I am not certain the same extent about people in Guinea or this new Niger putsch, or the Nigerian people, because it seems they have two agendas. One general was saying, I'm ready to attack Niger. And
so the Burkina Faso guy that you referenced, that was like Traore or something, and he was a captain.
Traore, yes, the youngest. And
Putin was like applauding his statement.
The youngest serving head of state.
Anti-imperial statement, kind of.
Who doesn't cash in the salary of the president,
Yeah, he's a diehard Thomas Sankara acolyte,
Yes, he
and
is.
And he has appointed as one of his top ministers a former close associate of Thomas Sankara. That guy seems genuine. He has
Absolutely.
already initiated a number of nationalist programs, education, food programs, uh, uh, nationalizing
Oh,
industry.
yes.
We want to
He,
get excited, and there's reason to be, optimistic,
yes,
but it's difficult to be optimistic about
Of course.
every single event that's going on. But
But
definitely
the gentleman that Carlo was talking about, within the first week, take notice, EU and US, he halved the salaries of every political official in the country because it was unseemly during poverty. Look at that.
that's
Just gonna say that.
Smedley Butler there. Wartime salary.
War is a racket. Yes.
Yeah, war is a racket. No corporate official who had government military contracts of any sort could earn more than the meanest private in the trenches.
Wow,
that's
if that
Butler.
still existed, imagine if that rule still existed.
Oh yeah, there'd be no war.
Well, no, the issue is, it's kind of a corruption issue, and there's this debate of how much should public servants make, how much should politicians make. I am more in the camp of they should be paid very well, not billionaires, because you can't be a billionaire without looting the economy. You just can't.
Yeah.
But it's reasonable to pay them well. And I would say, when stacking up the USA with Russia, I would say that we do have huge problems with corruption. We just call it lobbying. Oh, it's not corruption, it's lobbying. But I would say when it comes to low individual scale corruption, I think it is a pretty safe bet that the USA has considerably less than Russia. And the reason why is because, and you can ask any Russian this, and they'll tell you, public servants in Russia do not get paid well. I mean, we're talking maybe... I've heard of public servants in Russia getting paid like 30,000 rubles a month, which is
same in China. Yeah.
So, and the problem is that if you pay people that little, well, you know what? They're not going to deliberately be poor. They'll take bribes. They'll be like,
that's a good point.
I will help you out. And also another type of corruption Russia is famous for. And I've noticed this personally too. Their clinics and offices will basically sell certificates. So if you want some sort of certificate and you pay for it, they will just give it to you. I mean, I've noticed that.
Oh, we got that in Hungary. I hope
Yes.
I'm allowed to say that. Yeah.
Right. And so, to bring up an example, Russia's new transgender law, if you look at what it actually says, it doesn't ban transgender transitions, but what it does is it restricts it because, and when I read this on, Russia Today, I could totally see where they're coming from. You could see Russian clinics doing this. Just say, if you just come in and say, hey, I feel like a woman, here's, the 5,000 ruble fee, that doctor will say, oh, sure. Here you go. Here's your certificate. You are a woman now. I could see them doing that. So what this law did was it said, hey, only authorized clinics can give the psychological examinations and actually say, yes, you qualify for transition. I know it got a lot of bad press in the West, but let's be honest, everything from Russia gets bad press in the West. But that was actually pretty reasonable. It didn't ban transition. It was very clear that regardless of the circumstances of your transition, everybody who's already gotten it is grandfathered in. They're not going to cut off anyone's medical care. They're just going to be more careful about who they give it to in the future. And I bring that up as an example of it's reducing corruption involves paying people properly, licensing people, regulating people, holding them accountable, but also paying them properly. If you pay people too little, and that's to include anybody relating to the government, whether it's the military, contracting, or something else, it's important to pay them enough so they're not looking to make a quick buck, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, it also keeps the brain drain from happening. So qualified people aren't going to be working for pennies if they can come to the West and make 10 times as much. So and the West banks on that.
Interesting and good point. And from my country's history, it absolutely resonates. I mean, you can make it for people in power should have a comfortable living so as they're not that much susceptible to corruption, or make it in general as people could. Because, yeah, there was some factory theft here and there in the People's Republic. But as soon as 1990 came around, like everything that was voted on by councils, it was just for sale for the highest bidder. That's it. It was full. It was Ukraine back in 1990s Hungary until we got over to the 2000s. It wasn't easy, but that's an interesting point that I never considered. Yeah, about corruption and too low a salary.
But it's important, to have a meritocracy, right? To really, pay people well, but they've got to earn it, right? They've got to be producing, getting results, and based on merit. I mean, and that's a basic concept of Marxism, communism.
I heard Scott Ritter in conversation with someone, maybe Danny Haifong, saying, "I've yet to meet or read a Chinese, a specialist or an expert who really is not an expert. They know the field. That's what the PRC does. It's very hard to get in to the political offices. You really need to know your shit inside and out, and they do. That's very different from Ursula von der Leyen and Jens Stoltenberg and people like that."
Boris Johnson, though, he's the real deal.
He's a wackadoodle. I mean, I've known him for.
By the way,
when I had a shop in Washington D.C., he was a customer. Basically, he'd come in every once in a while.
Did he ever live in D.C. or he just visited a lot?
No, he lives there. He still lives here.
Oh, I didn't know that. Johnson? The British clown with the Trump hair, right?
He lives in D.C. Ed Litvak, yeah.
Wow.
His children went to school here. Yeah.
I wasn't going to mention.
I just throw that out as a joke, Ward.
Wasn't going to mention.
I don't know if any of you saw that interview, but he literally talks about someone in China should rise up and assassinate Xi because Xi is a monster. And it's so wackadoodle. Yet at the same time, when Pepe Escobar talked about him with Danny Haifong, he said, Litvak has tremendous influence. And I guess he does. He's been around a long time, and he wrote an important book on military strategy, which is well respected among not only congressmen and senators, but the military itself. So, but he's crazy. He's out of his fucking mind.
I just want to add, I wasn't going to bring this up, but since Ian mentioned surgeries in Russia, Sarah Ashton Cirillo, the transgender American sort of volunteer who went to Ukraine, is now the official voice of the armed forces of Ukraine towards the Western public. That should go down well, I think. That's a way of belittling.
That's a way of belittling LGBTQ people.
It actually is demeaning to them. That's what I would say.
You're associating her with a losing cause.
It is demeaning. Yeah. Demeaning to them.
She's cooked.
Well, I think when it comes to LGBTQ issues and the way it relates into globalism and American foreign policy is that it's sort of like this Trojan horse that gets let into these local countries because, it's more because, it starts off with the completely reasonable position that, you should not persecute or prosecute people for what they are doing in their private lives, for who they're choosing to love. And also there's this financial incentive, it's like, because everybody wants that American money. Everybody wants that chasing the dragon of getting let into NATO and being let into the EU. Everybody and his mother wants that.
Well, it used to be coveted, but yes, go on.
All you have to do is accept these NGOs, and it really is that Trojan horse because it sounds completely reasonable. And if you look at these thousands and thousands of NGOs that are related to gender issues, civil rights issues, they all seem super mundane. You're like, oh, okay, I help, transgender people in whatever cities. Okay, well, okay. I mean, what could this group possibly do? And then there's thousands of them. Then you see like those riots in Georgia, because they try to pass a law on foreign influence. And it's like, once you let those NGOs in, it's impossible to get them out. It's like they're left to your jugular.
brings to mind Lukashenko, where he said, we're going to slaughter those NGOs, and he
Yes.
meant it on television. I love that interview. Go, Carl.
What's important to remember is that the U.S. corporate people that promote LGBTQ in their commercials and their films and all, the U.S. government that is promoting people within their system with LGBTQ, they don't give a rat's rectum about LGBTQ.
Of course not.
What China probably is responsible for more propaganda coming out of the West on LGBTQ people than anyone in the history of the world, because China has a policy of, when you go into a country, it's economics. We're building the bridge, we're building the hospital, whatever your slant is on LGBTQ rights, we're not interfering with that. So this gives the U.S. a huge wedge. So they're not, believe me, they are not above that kind of hypocrisy. I mean, if it was an advantage for them to kill every LGBTQ person they could get their hands on, if that became an advantage for the U.S. Corporate structure and a U.S. government, they would kill them.
They would be in a heartbeat. They'd be evangelical Christians, I think.
Yeah, you're right. Exactly. You've already got the army set.
So the only principle that governs their behavior is their pursuit of their own perceived best interest. So that's their number one principle, and they'll utilize, they'll exploit, they'll use any kind of thing they think that they can use to their advantage, like the whole LGBT.
Well, you guys have heard of Rex 84 Night Train, right?
I haven't.
I've heard of it, but that's about it.
All right. So I'm an old man. I would see how old I am. Look, during Iran-Contra, Oliver, came out in the John Kerry hearings that Oliver North was supposed to come up with a plan for locking up. They were planning a war against Nicaragua, an invasion of Nicaragua. It went beyond arming the Mosquito Indians and laying mines in the bay down there in the harbor, and that plan was to use bases in Colorado, old army bases that were used to train people like the Tibetan insurgency against against the Chinese, and to refurbish them and to lock up everyone in the country that was against invading Nicaragua, which it seems kind of absurd because Nicaragua is so small. But Ronald Reagan said we have to be careful because Nicaragua is it's almost right across the border, and they could be in Harbinger, Texas in 2 days or some bullshit like that. And the U.S. people are so stupid they swallowed that. So Rex 84 Night Train was a plan to lock up people like me who were literally spending our days supporting guerrilla movements in Central America, especially in Nicaragua, the FLSN, and then of course in El Salvador the LMFN. No, the LMF. Anyway, the Farabundo Martí National Liberation Front and the ELN. So this was a plan if they invaded Nicaragua and there was a large outcry to just lock everybody up and in bases in Colorado. And it got and it actually, the right wing in this country used that as a tool, Steve Bannon, as a tool to promote the fact that they were going to lock up these right wingers in a similar situation, and so that was used as a kind of wedge, which led to January 6th. Because those people know about Rex 84 Night Train. So the only reason I know about it, I was so far on the left that I was getting information about it,
Yeah, interesting.
all the time.
Things come to mind. Based on Ian's comments, Uganda came to mind and the LGBTQ issue being used there. It's also used against Hungary by the EU, by the way. And what Carlo just said, I mean, Gonzalo Lira comes to my mind right now, being silenced for a political opinion, and we have zero updates on his story. But we have to get back to you after this short little break, and we'll continue where we left off.
Oh, right.
Do you know that there is a publishing company that wants to make life easier for you as a writer? This publishing company is called World Inkers Printing and Publishing. We publish in all different languages, and we're looking for writers of all genres, all formats. We're looking for scholars, ghostwriters, playwrights, poets, short fiction, novelists, you name it. We're looking for anybody who is interested in writing and the craft of writing to be in touch with us. You can reach us at info.worldinkers@gmail.com. With World Inkers Printing and Publishing, you do not require a lot of money to publish with us. Contact us today at info.worldinkers@gmail.com. Become a winner with other authors at World Inkers Printing and Publishing. Give us a shot. We will surely finish you.
And
So we were just oh, go ahead, Carlo.
yeah, I
Sorry.
just wanted to say one thing about Uganda. It's interesting because they have some of the harshest laws against LGBTQ people in the world. And those laws were written by American evangelicals. Just want to say that.
That's true. That's true.
Well, when you look at, and I think that Carlos relates to your earlier comments about the American policy of going up to a poker table and flipping the whole table, seeing where the cards fall. With you, I would say actually, this reminds me of I did a couple trips to Armenia recently. You can definitely in the Caucasus see this. You could describe it as flipping a table. You could also see it as playing all sides, betting on all sides. There's 4 players at this table. I'm going to bet on all of them, and then my guy wins no matter who wins. And so you see that. I'll bring up Armenia as an example. You can go to Armenia, and you see this USAID, and you can actually, if you pay attention to the monuments and the historical signage there, you can see, sponsored by USAID, sponsored by this NGO, sponsored by that NGO. They push these very neo-nationalist ideas that, Armenia is this great ancient culture, which it is. But, it's those bad Turks, those bad Muslims who are responsible for every bad thing that's ever happened to Armenia and Armenians. And you should, like you go into the Museum of the Armenian Genocide, and of course there's a tragedy. Everybody knows there's a tragedy, but one of the first things that you see when you walk into that museum, there's a sign that's talking about the inherently violent nature of Islam. And, I dare you to set up a museum in the USA and put up a sign that talks about the inherently violent nature of Islam. And see how long it would be before someone complained. And, rightly so. It's collectivizing people.
Yeah. So that was a USAID sponsored sign.
This is in the Armenian Genocide Museum, which is interesting. It's interesting to look it up online. I actually wrote an article about it. I can share you the link with you. But basically, so there was a monument to the Armenian genocide built during the Soviet era when Armenia was part of the Soviet Union, and it's a very Soviet style monument. It's very simple, it's minimalist, and there's no overt political antagonistic message to it. The museum was built in the 90s after Soviet Union.
After the fall, yeah.
And of course there's those American fingers in it. And it has a much more, and I think that's the issue with every American-sponsored project lately, is that it doesn't just acknowledge a tragedy; it finds a way to contemporize it and politicize it. And it's actually very interesting to see the Armenian genocide because it's almost a copy. Like I swear, it is almost a copy paste of the Holodomor in Ukraine. Like they literally took the same talking points. Instead of it's the bad Russians, it's the bad Turks who are responsible, right? And they do this in every country because it's interesting, especially in Armenia. It's interesting because Turkey is part of NATO and is quote unquote a U.S. ally. So it really is literally playing. And also, if you look at the NATO website, the actual NATO website, describes Azerbaijan. It's not NATO, of course, but it's a NATO partner. So it is literally playing every side, because Israel is also involved in that tangentially. And so it's really just playing every...
That's against Iran. Yeah, I was just going to say, you read my bloody mind, because the Holodomor Memorial in New York City went up in November 2015, when Russia was already bad, you know, under Putin bad. Before that, there was no Holodomor myth. That's when they started this crap propaganda, straight from 1940s Nazis, by the way. They initiated this propaganda against Stalin. But yeah, interesting points on the playing against all sides. What the Chinese did in Global Times, which is the Communist Party's major English-speaking magazine, they said the West is playing a game of whack-a-mole. It's going to get more irritated as it loses. And yet, I kind of see that. It's been a long time of playing each side, but spending everything anywhere. And the latest move I've seen from Washington is they're apparently buying shells, these elusive 155 millimeter shells from South Korea, from Taiwan. Interestingly, I don't know how they're going to go up against it. We've seen Nikki Haley's video, and also in talks with Japan. Like, they're emptying the stocks at home already. They're going to empty those to send to Kiev. What about that big next war against China? How's that going to go if you stretch this thin, and the world knows you stretched this thin?
Ian, how are they going to take on both powers?
Well, my take on this is that they don't see China and Russia as the same type of enemy. I think it's very different. And I think it's very much like creatures in an ecosystem. We're all animals in an ecosystem, right? And if you look at any ecosystem in nature, you will see that animals are completely different from each other, generally won't be enemies. I mean, they might, one might be predator, one might be prey, but there won't be one species just straight up trying to slaughter a totally different one. That happens, though, when you have two very similar populations who share the same niche and are conflicting over that same niche. So when you have two, so I think that it does apply to humans. When you have two cultures that are very similar, have overlapping interests, you get those conflicts. And I think with China was always going back to the colonial era. It was a country. It was an ancient civilization that needed to be subjugated, but they could be traded with as long as they didn't cross. Like with the opiate wars, as long as you don't, the opiate wars were of course horrible and brutal, but they were not trying to destroy China. It was just about we're going to go teach those.
Keep them underfoot. Yes.
People, yes, we're going to go teach them a lesson. With Russia, it's just we need to break them up. There might have been thoughts of just subjugating them in the past, but now it's just straight up. It's sharing the same niche as us. It just has to be like human Homo sapiens and the Neanderthals. It just has to be a war to the death. I think that's. But I think with China, I don't know. It's one of those things that's impossible to say. Like I was very surprised by how Ukraine turned out, and a lot of people were. So it's it's something I could be wrong on. But I look at the whole situation with China, and I think it's posturing. There's not the intent. Because you're right, it makes no sense to fight both Russia and China at the same time. So I think it's posturing. And also with that said, too, here's the thing. Right now, we have a status quo. There is no reason right now for a war because everybody's sticking with the status quo. We shouldn't be worried unless the U.S. State Department just comes out and says we officially are leaving the one China policy.
That's
the other. Next, there's the elections in 2024, and that's and that is concerning to me. How the Pentagon, all these different people are predicting. Well, we think China is going to do their unprovoked, brutal invasion of Taiwan in 2024, which is interesting because that's when the election is. So it might be. I can't sit there and even claim to be an expert on Chinese or politics or anything, but I do think that as of right now, especially since it's like with Russians and Ukrainians, it's Han Chinese and Han's Chinese. They're not. I don't think the Chinese are sitting there wanting to cause huge loss of life and war. No, there's no way.
This
What's
GT article is all about, look, the beast is
Right.
coming down. We just have to be patient. This whack-a-mole game they're doing around the world, they're just going to overextend themselves. That's what the article is about. Yeah.
So I think with China, though, I think it's really, I think there's some sort of backroom posturing. There's maneuvering going on, and I think also we have to consider that we don't know how what would happen if China and the USA decoupled. I think it would hurt both sides. I'm not sure if the Chinese are sitting there and thinking, okay, could our economy handle decoupling to the extent that Russia did? Because the reality is that Russia was already pretty isolated at the time, and they were built to be
A gigantic
so-
resource and
right.
and
Well, and there's that old Russian saying, that our only allies are the army and the navy, so they're used to that. So I don't know if China's interconnection with the rest of the world economy is possibly their greatest strength. Is also could be a problem if they lose those imports and they get. So it might just be, I think it's posturing right now. They're just they're doing that game of teach China a lesson and they'll back down, and that's what they think will work. The true military enemy is Russia. I don't think that's going to change in the near future.
Rhetorically, yes. And also there's divisions. I mean, basically, what I wanted to say is, if you haven't seen the new Nikki Haley video on her official 2024 campaign, it was, we will not only have China lose, but it will be in the trash heap of history, just like the Soviet Union was. On the other hand, we had Elon Musk go there. We had the Apple CEO. We had Bill Gates go there. The 100-year-old Henry Kissinger went to China, and the head of Raytheon, this guy, just went on an interview on one of the three, CNN or CNBC, I don't know. I didn't share the clip with you guys, but it was basically this decoupling idea. We can't do it. It's impractical. We have to find a way to get along with China. There's different voices going on. And what we have, and I'd love to get your thought on this because this has been bothering me for the last few days, is these fence-sitting nations between the giants. It's Turkey, it's India. The latest one is Kazakhstan, who's apparently agreed to take on the 30 biolabs that can no longer be in Ukraine.
Wow.
And they now have something like nuclear emergency drills or something like that going on in the country. That's scary. But India is very strange. Most of the media is 100% against BRICS, against the SCO. The Chinese are growingly weary of the Indians and their apparently reflexive West backing. And they said the rule-based order must be respected. The BRICS doesn't want a currency. They seem to be going westward. Whereas, since the grain deal, Mr. Erdogan and Turkey is in deep crap. And it wasn't just finding ships, blocking ships that had, but from the tourist board of Russia. It's subtle. It's not diplomacy, but they said for tourists, Russian tourists, there are other destinations that are cheaper, not just Turkey. You could go to Asia, or you could go to Latin America now. I don't know if you know, Turkey has a massive tourism industry, and it's mostly Russians. Every friend of mine who went to see this Hagia Sophia, they said it's full of Russians. Imagine pulling that out now that the grain's out.
Putin's going to be in Turkey soon, right? He's going to go visit Erdogan.
There was a telephone readout that the two leaders agreed that Putin will visit Erdogan. Yes, that's all we know. There's nothing about the contents. It's very secretive. But I just wanted to get your opinion on these fence sitters who will just wait out and see who wins or whatever. But it's just an uneasy feeling for me,
Well, India's in kind of an unfortunate situation. It's one of those, they have a lot. They do have a lot of success. I'm going to sit there and say they don't have successes. They do have a lot of successes under their belt, but the problem is they kind of got off to a rocky start. And a friend of mine actually said this to me. China got a Mao and India got a Gandhi, and that, of course, that's true because Mao really did those very painful homogenization processes. Get
the
people
Cultural Revolution,
literate, speaking the same language, reading off the same sheet of music. India never did that. They've still got this weird kind of colonial era system because what the British would do is when they subjugated a nation, they would put their crappy little minions, English-speaking minions from the local oligarchy running the country, and that unfortunately didn't really change in India. So they still had those linguistic barriers, and they still got these wonky. And you can actually see this with, I do like Bollywood films sometimes, but you can kind of see that because movies tend to be made by the more liberal, upper classes of society. You can kind of see how they jump into English. And I remember watching a Bollywood movie, very confused by that. I texted one of my Indian friends, is like, why are they doing that? It's like, oh, that's just how they talk, because they will just randomly, like even in their movies, they'll just randomly break into English, and it's very, and that's kind of an issue because you have this, because we have the driver of a ship who's not actually interested in the ship and has some guy in the walkie-talkie in another ship telling him what to do, and he's just kind of steering the ship into the rocks. With Kazakhstan, I mean, there's a lot. I mean, it's the biolab thing is unfortunate, but it's not unusual. I think this was in 2017. It was about 5 or 6 years ago. They made this really weird decision of abandoning their own script that they've used and switching to Latin, which would effectively, which is crazy because Kazakhstan, frankly, doesn't have a great literacy rate to begin with, but if you switch alphabets, that basically renders everybody literate. Like imagine
I had no, they were Cyrillic then, just like Russia.
Yes, that was Kazakhstan. They want to gradually adopt this in their education system, and imagine just like you figured out Latin script, and then they switch to Cyrillic script. Or something like that. Imagine, even if it's the same words, just switching alphabets makes you illiterate. You can't read instantly. Same thing with Moldova. This has actually happened a few months ago. Moldova, which is allegedly, they're like, oh, no. Moldova is a sovereign nation. We're not planning to mold them into Romania. What did they do a few months ago? They passed a law making Romanian the official language. Imagine, Moldova, not Romania, Moldova. Official language Romanian. I mean, how can you tell me they did that out of the interests of Moldovan people and culture? It's crazy. I mean,
great information that I had no idea of.
And China has a huge jump on India because centuries ago they had during the Han Dynasty period, the early Han Dynasty period, they regulated weights and measures. And that sort of thing. A wagon axle could only be so wide, so that you wouldn't tear up the roads as badly, and that sort of thing. But I just wanted to say something about the jump from Russia to China to now North Africa. Well, the Sahel, I shouldn't say North Africa. The Sahel by the United States. I think Ukraine is now a lost cause. It's obvious. Yeah, that's gone. And any kind of conflict, and I agree with Ian on this, with China was never even within the irrational framework of U.S. foreign policymakers like Nuland or Blinken or Sullivan or any of those fools. So now they've shifted to Africa as a kind of, at least they can continue to weaken Europe, France in particular, and of course England and Germany are suffering too. So now they've moved to North Africa, and this is their new plot. This is their new devious scheme, and I think they've basically given up on Ukraine and China. Do you feel that way, guys? I mean,
on that point, there's trouble in paradise because the Fitch rating agency recently downgraded U.S. credits from AAA plus to AA plus, and both the White House, Karine Jean-Pierre, who said some absolutely surreal things, and the Treasury under Yellen were like protesting this decision as it's no basis in reality. Biden has created a robust economic recovery. That's what the White House said. Karine Jean-Pierre.
That's interesting. I mean, is Fitch is it really an independent thing? That, I mean, it must have some independence, and who knows what's behind that decision.
I have no idea, but that's.
But I mean, the U.S. military is always the primary backer of its currency, so. It's hard to say, but I think the propaganda war kind of mirrors where the focus is of the empire. And when I woke up this morning, I saw this huge, big propaganda offensive against China. An article in the Telegraph by one of the main anti-China propagandists that lives in Britain, but he essentially was just. It sounded like they took the propaganda against Russia with all their hacking. They're hacking and getting into all of our institutions and stealing all of our data. And they just put that with China. But it was just this huge article about how, the U.S. is frantically trying to find out how deep the Chinese have gotten into our internet systems. And there's just panic. And Britain Britain is woefully underprepared, and they're just, the Chinese hackers are just doing getting way over on Britain. So I mean,
which one was it? Zihan Zenz, maybe Gordon Chang?
Shoot, he was an
Anyway,
old
one of these
China
folks.
hand. He has 28 years in the foreign service of Britain. He's a Chinese expert, but I mean, he just looks like a typical schmuck. That the exact kind of person, like his image on the article, he's the kind of person that's going to write some shit like that. I forget his name, but just go to the Telegraph and China hacking. It'll be the first hit. It was from today. I could pull up his name, but it's not that important. But so these, the propaganda war kind of mirrors where the focus is. So it's on Africa. I don't think it's been taken off of China. I mean, obviously, China's the big elephant in the room. That
don't forget that on that point.
Yeah,
I wanted to respond to Ian on some points later, but on that point, have you escaped somehow the propaganda of Africa? Because most of the internet is talking to me about new anti-white leaders. That is the PR line against these people. Look at these anti-white leaders. I've never seen black supremacists before, but I guess that would fit.
No, that's an interesting approach on the subject, and it's designed to turn us against those leaders. It's going to justify the U.S. efforts to overthrow them and to put in their own puppets. It's just obvious and blatant. But so I'm sorry. Did you have a question for Ian, or did you?
Yeah, he mentioned the point, the head start of China again on India, and I completely agree. I wanted to ask, because I spoke to Chinese people, they said the Cultural Revolution period was a bloody bad time, but it was necessary, and we had to do it. And that's how we got ahead, to industrialize, to do everything. And Russian people I spoke to, they still don't, I wonder if you're the same experience. When I talk about Stalin, the great leader, of course, well, he is Russia. But when I talk about Lenin, it's still like he's remembered for bad times. I wonder if you've had sort of that experience, because get from a backwards sort of medieval agricultural nation to heavy industry and space, programs, which China and Russia has, it took a lot of work, and sometimes it wasn't, that comfortable. But they get remembered differently.
Well, I'd say there's a couple premises there that might not necessarily right, because whether or not a statement is true is often based on if the premise is based on is true. So to start off with, I would say the statement that the Russian Empire was backwards in comparison to its Western European counterparts.
I just mean technologically.
Well,
sorry.
I mean, no, not at all. I mean, even technologically, and I think it's popular, and I think even people who are admirers of the Soviet Union tend to jump on that bandwagon quickly, because it's just so, look at how they turn, and it's true. Turning a backwards agrarian nation into an industrial superpower in 20 years is a huge accomplishment. But at the same time, we have to remember the perspective that in World War I, Germany was literally scrapping together junk metal to build tanks one at a time. They literally, because of the British blockade, right? So to say that, the Western Europe, that peasants and farmers living in Western Europe were light years ahead of their Russian counterparts, I think it's just
we were not. I didn't mean us. Hungary was just as backwards.
Right. But to answer your question, though, I think maybe, because Lenin and Stalin are remembered for somewhat different reasons. Lenin is, led that great social experiment to start the Soviet Union. And he's more of I think that's definitely true. You'll certainly see more statues of him. You'll see, like, every small town in Russia has the statue of Lenin somewhere. He's a more mainstream. He's a more accepted. He's like, the George Washington of, he's the guy who founded that modern country that we associate
the Mao, the Washington, and he said the electrification and council power, which is what the word Soviet means, is the Soviet Union. But there was also White Terror, there was also the Civil War, so different things under him.
But I think the reason and this is what you might be seeing from talking to your friends too. Stalin is a more polarizing figure, but he's also, if you want to make a political statement, it's Stalin, because you go for, and you can see this if you go to the Kremlin wall and you see, Stalin will always have more but no, even if it's not a holiday, just throughout the year, we'll always have more roses and flowers on his little spot where his bust is. Because if you're a Russian, or even if you're not a Russian, you're just someone who visits Russia, you want to make a political statement. If you go Lenin, you're like, Lenin, okay, I mean, who cares? But you make a controversial, provoking political statement, you go for Stalin. Stalin is great, right?
Thank you.
It's much more, so it's not necessarily one is better than the other. I mean, they're different guys. They were at different periods. One was the successor of the other. So I wouldn't even say in Russia itself, one is considered better than the other. They were just at different times, and they're remembered for different reasons.
Thank you. And I'm sorry for sidetracking.
Yeah.
Yeah. What if Lenin had lived? I mean, his life was cut short.
That's what Trotskyites dream of. They think everything would have been different.
Well, he had that stroke and was not the same after that. He was definitely on a ticking clock after that. Unfortunately, there's no way to know. And to bring up what you mentioned, the Cultural Revolution, Ben, you mentioned the Cultural Revolution in China, and you meant and the repressions, purges in Russia. And people love that. What if the purges didn't happen in Russia? What if all those military officers?
It's useless to ask this question.
Well, the problem is that you did have strong leaders like Zhukov who won the war. But if you had not removed people from power, relieved people of their commands, put people in jail, that would mean those guys like Zhukov would not have been charged. We had another set of guys. And were those guys as competent? Were they trustworthy? Were they not traitors?
Yezhov Shino event, you probably know, he was the head of the police, and he was just like too brutal. You're gone, mate. Sorry.
Yeah, so it's one of those. There was definitely a reason to be afraid in 1930s Soviet Union. Even Russian writers like Boris Vasiliev, who was a paratrooper in World War II, and if you read his books or watch the movies based on his books, you can see he's not like this uber pro-Soviet guy. Soviet Union's great, Soviet Union's perfect. He's actually very critical, even negative about the Soviet Union. But at the same time, even his more critical stories exist here, and does say that there was a reason for it. There was a reason to be suspicious of people. You had to be suspicious of people who were fascists or working with the Germans or working with someone else. It was a legitimate thing to be worried about. So,
yeah. I mean, I'm sorry I sidetracked the conversation at the end there, but I thought that was very interesting. I hope the viewers did too. A lot of things there I didn't know. So we got about 5 minutes. Any last thoughts? Maybe go around the clock. Who wants to?
Well, we were probably the only show in the on the internet that didn't mention Gonzalo Lira.
We did actually just for a second, but
not today. Today.
We all had our say on Tuesday's program. What are your thoughts? Because it's very divisive. Scott Ritter says he's SBU. Brian Berletic defends him and champions him.
So does McClure.
It makes no sense to me, because the reality is that even whether or not you like Ukraine or are against Ukraine, you have to admit that when a country is in a wartime situation, you have someone who is constantly running his mouth and causing problems for you. You lock him up and throw away the key. And it doesn't make any sense. It makes no sense. Like what? Like he comes out. This is 2 times he's done this. I'm not going to belittle him and say, because I'm only guessing here, but it's very strange to me that twice in a row this dude's like, "Oh, I was tortured." Then they were just like, "Das vidanya, okay, go home." I go on Twitter like immediately. We're going to let you out of jail so you can go home to your Twitter account and say we're Nazis. How does that make sense? And what planet would not even the SBU, any security service act like that?
It's strange, but let's not forget that even though people didn't lift too many fingers for him, he has Chilean and US passports, citizenship. So it may have been not that easy to get rid of. And, I see merits on both stories. It doesn't really interest me. What I saw was a man stressed out of his mind, afraid for his life, and I just wanted to be safe. And that would be me.
As far as Gonzalo Lira goes, I don't really take a stance on it. I just find the story strange, but I don't sit there.
I got questions too, believe me.
Question, right. And also to answer your question about U.S. passports, they do have clout. As a U.S. passport holder myself, they do have clout, but at the same time, they're not magic jail free cards. There are American citizens locked up in Ukraine. There was one particular American I wrote about several times, who was an American farmer from North Dakota. He
Texas Bentley.
I don't remember his name, unfortunately. I'd have to look.
Oh no, sorry,
at
he's
the
in
article
Russia.
I wrote. But basically, this guy invested money, bought a farm in Ukraine. The guy he hired became a senior person in their agricultural ministry. He embezzled money. This guy went to court, complained about him, went to Ukraine to sue him in court, and ended up getting imprisoned on bogus charges. So, they're not shy. If you cause trouble, they're not shy about walking. I think especially someone as vocal as Gonzalo would, they could, for God's sake, they could deport him. They could get rid of it. They could just send him to Florida or wherever, I don't get
Or just whack him. It's happened before. We've seen FSB killings, like on camera.
Did he look stressed out to you guys in the latest videos?
To me,
he did to me. I totally bought everything he was saying. I mean, I reconsidered after hearing Scott Ritter's take, but I'm not convinced that Scott's correct. I mean, Scott seems pretty adamant that he's an SBU agent, or he got flipped by the SBU and he's working. And he might be right because Scott, he has some expertise which I lack. But just going by my gut and my own intuition, I mean, it didn't seem like that's what's going on. I think he's a self-promoter. He wants to, he has these visions probably of selling a big book and making a lot of money off of his thing. And that might be what the weirdness is that we all notice. And he's not being straight up. He's being, he's embellishing here. He's hiding facts, but it doesn't necessarily mean he's SBU.
That would make equally no sense if he were SBU. Why would he do absolute pro-Russia videos throughout?
In his last videos, he listed a bunch of names of the people the SBU has killed. Some dissidents, some journalists, some social media people, just like himself. And so that doesn't seem like something the SBU would want to put out there. But who knows? That could be part of developing credibility to be leveraged later, like Scott was saying. So
there's something called the 40-60 rule, and that means is if you run a disinformation outlet or channel or paper, this was developed by the Germans in World War II. It's a 40-60 rule. You can look it up. But basically what you do is 60% of the information you release is useful to your target audience, and 40% is your own messaging you want to put in their heads. So if you look at a Facebook page or a Twitter page or a news channel that is meant to be disinformation to mislead a foreign audience, that's the rule you can look at, because you'll see a bunch of stories that sound very bad for your side, but you inserted key messages that you want to push.
Interesting.
I think the Wall Street Journal is less factual than 60-40. Sorry.
They have like a 10-90 rule, it seems.
Yeah.
90% bullshit, 10%.
I got Carlo with that one.
Yeah, that was good. You nailed me.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure our hour is up. Ian, thank you very much for coming on. It was a great discussion. We will definitely have you back. So we'll be back next week on Thursday at Foreign Policy Review. We'll be back on Tuesday on the Blowback Roundtable. Thanks, everybody, for joining. We'll see you soon.
Thanks.
Do you know that there is a publishing company that wants to make life easier for you as a writer? This publishing company is called World Inkers Printing and Publishing. We publish in all different languages, and we're looking for writers of all genres, all formats. We're looking for scholars, ghostwriters, playwrights, poets, short fiction, novelists, you name it. We're looking for anybody who is interested in writing and the craft of writing to be in touch with us. You can reach us at info.worldinkers@gmail.com. With World Inkers Printing and Publishing, you do not require a lot of money to publish with us. Contact us today at info.worldinkers@gmail.com. Become a winner with other authors at World Inkers Printing and Publishing. Give us a shot. We will surely finish you.